Well, welcome everybody. I'm going to be making sure I'm next to this microphone so that the folks online are able to hear. But you have the screens in front. Hopefully everybody's able to see well. Welcome to the Housing Needs Meeting for the Southeast Tennessee Development District for this region. I just want to thank everybody for coming today. I got to meet most of you. Not everybody, and if I didn't get to meet you, either please come and introduce yourself to me before you leave, or I will try to make it over to you. I'm really pleased that we have so many different folks from the community here who do all kinds of different and very important work, and so thank you for that work that you do. I work for THDA, and I am on the research and planning team. I'm one of the research analysts there, myself and Benjamin Davis over here. And we're going to be jumping into a presentation about housing needs in the Southeast Tennessee region in just a moment. Really quickly, in case you need a restroom, they are out the back, down the hall, across a little foyer thing, and you should be able to see them kind of as you're walking into this main area. So feel free if, step out obviously at any time if needed. And we're going to go ahead and get started. I can't tell if it's advancing or not. There we go. Okay, problem solved. So before we get started, I do want to thank the Southeast Tennessee Development District. I floated doing this meeting earlier this spring and said, I'll bring snacks. And they said, we'll provide lunch. So if y'all could give them a round of applause for providing lunch, that's really, really kind. Appreciate that. And also thank you to the AIM Center for hosting. I just really appreciate everybody who's been working on this with me. I appreciate your time. So this meeting is going to do two things. One thing is related to something called the consolidated plan. Some of you will be familiar with this term, but basically what it is the state of Tennessee's application for about $50 to $60 million in federal funding from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. And when the state receives this money, we then distribute it to 5 different programs around the state. And you all, some of you receive funds through these programs. So the programs that are part of the consolidated planning programs are the Community Development Block Grant, which is CDBG, the Emergency Solutions Grant, ESG, Home Investment Partnership or HOME, Housing Trust Fund, HTF, and Housing Opportunities for Persons with HIV or AIDS, that's HOPWA. So that's one thing it's doing. But the other thing is, because we do this 5-year strategic plan, we want to make it an opportunity to learn a lot more about what your needs are more broadly. So if you're not affiliated with something related to the consolidated plan, you're still in the right place. We still want to hear what is going well in your region and what your needs are, and hopefully be able to provide some useful and interesting information about housing in the region. Just a really quick primer, though, on what these programs are. So you can see HUD gives the money to the state of Tennessee. We distribute it to the programs. The CDBG program is mostly focused on infrastructure-related projects. This is actually overseen by the Department of Economic and Community Development. Then the HOME program, HTF program, and ESG program are overseen by THDA. Home is mostly focused on single-family rehabilitation projects or construction projects, although they're starting to get into small multifamily development, mostly in rural areas. The HTF program is focused on multifamily development, but it's focused on multifamily units for extremely low income beneficiaries. So these are folks who have an income of 30% of the area median income or less. Most of the other programs are focused on folks who have incomes that are at 80% of the area median income or less. And then the program here, HOPWA, is overseen through the Department of Health. It's mostly a housing subsidy program for low-income families where at least one person has the diagnosis of HIV or AIDS. So before we get started, I do want to make sure that I mention, like, I hope that it will be evident that I have a spirit of humility about coming to see y'all today. I have been looking really carefully at the publicly available kind of data related to your region, but because I'm not from here and haven't met most of you and all of that, I am not going to be familiar with the granular data in your area. So I'll be curious as we get to the end of the presentation and do the Q&A, what stood out to you in the data? What do you notice that is is missing or off? What seems accurate? The data that we're going to look at today is mostly from 2022. And it's mostly from the American Community Survey. So that's going to be subject to sampling error. So that doesn't mean that everything today is going to accurately represent what we see on the ground or what you see on the ground. And I would love to know that if you notice things that need more context. And it definitely isn't going to capture the strengths of the community. So having close-knit communities, it's not going to capture the generational connection to the land or community, or having a unique culture, but hopefully we'll get to learn some about that during the focus groups. So our agenda for today is for both the in-person and online folks. We're going to do the housing needs presentation right now. This will be followed by a question and answer time after the presentation. And then we're going to do some focus groups just with you all that are able to be here in the room. And Ben and I will split the group in half, and we'll get to hear from y'all. And you have some a paper with the questions that we'll be kind of focusing on during the focus groups in front of you. So we'll definitely revisit that when we get there, but just wanted to let you know that. So let's go ahead and jump into the presentation related to housing needs. So the way that we are thinking about housing needs regionally is about the housing needs environment. And so this involves capturing what does the current populations and households look like, as well as their incomes, what is the current housing supply, as well as the housing prices, and then what are we seeing with respect to future population and households? Is the area growing, and how quickly? Is the area shrinking, and how quickly? And then what does that mean for the future housing supply that we need and the instability sometimes that comes with housing struggles? So today we're going to start out talking about what the region is like right now. Then we're going to talk about what housing is needed. And last, we're going to talk about what will happen if that housing isn't built. So we're going to focus first on who lives here, the current population, what comprises the current housing supply, and then how much does that housing currently cost? So here you'll see a map of Tennessee's development districts. That's the level that I've broken the needs analysis down by for this con plan process. And you can see that Tennessee has a pretty vast difference in its urban centers and its rural centers. It has many of both. And you can see that the greater Nashville area is the most populous region with about 2 million people. And you can see that the least populous region is the Northwest region with about 250,000. Southeast is sitting kind of in the middle of those. We're at 666,000 people, and this is in 2022. And you can kind of see those gray clusters represent areas of density. So every single development district, of course, has areas that are dense where you can find towns, amenities, so on and so forth. But this kind of gives you a picture of what the population looks like across the state. And then this one has the little triangles. This is telling you about how things have changed within the last 5 years, or really from 2017 to 2022. When I say last 5 years, that's kind of what I mean. It's 2017 to 2022. So you can see here that the greater Nashville area grew by 10.5% in 5 years. And that Southeast grew at a more moderate pace, 3.7%. But we do have some areas of the state that are either staying relatively stable or even losing a little bit of population. You can see the Mid-South and Northwest region have very slight declines. So now let's zoom in and take a look at what we see in the counties in the Southeast region. So you can see here that, of course, Hamilton County is the most populous county in the Southeast region, followed by Bradley. And then you have several other towns scattered throughout the rest of the region. And they're pretty different in population. Some are very rural, some are kind of moderately rural. And you can see here that the population growth in the last 5 years is pretty different as well. And I'm going to need somebody to make sure that I'm saying this one right. Can somebody tell me how to say, is it Squatchy? Sequatchie. No. Squatchy. Sequatchie. Sequatchie. Okay. I've read it so many times, y'all, and I knew I was going to have to ask. So Sequatchie. I will do my best to get it right from here on. You can see that similar to, it's a much smaller population, but similar to Nashville, it grew at 9.6% in 5 years. So that's a pretty big change, even if you're starting from a smaller population. So this is showing the demographic distribution related to the Southeast region. So you can see that for age, about 23% are children, 19% are younger adults, 39% middle-aged adults, and senior adults is about 19%. And for race and ethnicity, the Southeast region has a 77.9% white population, 11.2% Black, 5.6% Hispanic, and that's all races of Hispanic ethnicity. And then all other races are included in the 5.4% just because they didn't fit well on our graph, so we grouped them together. For household income distribution, you can see the different bands and the different percentages, of course. But I want to draw your attention to the median, which is where there's that 50% arrow. Okay, so that's kind of in the middle of the 50 to 75% mark. The area median income, when we talk about that, that's like about $60,000-ish here in Southeast Tennessee. So all of the different like AMI percentages are based off of that. And I just want to highlight that since I'll be kind of throwing AMI around here some. And then you can also see for the household tenure. So 68.4% are an owner population and 31.6% are renters. So that's like roughly 2 to 1 homeowners for every renter. They're definitely not the same size groups here in the Southeast. Now, when we look at the homeownership rate across the state, you can see that the Southeast region has a relatively high homeownership rate. So it's roughly on par with Northwest and Southwest. The only two, South Central, East, and First have a marginally higher homeownership rate and Upper Cumberland. But you can see that the upper ends is kind of this high 60s to low 70s. Whereas you can see that the homeownership rate in the greater Nashville is 65%, and in the Mid-South, it's at 57.6. So there's a pretty wide variation from the Mid-South region all the way up to South Central. So now we're going to kind of take a look at some of the same data again, but we're going to break it apart by tenure. So remember, these aren't the same size groups. The owner group is roughly 2 times as large. But when you compare the distributions, you can see that renters tend to be younger and owners tend to be older as far as the distribution goes. And that makes sense. It takes time to build up the savings or assets to qualify for a mortgage. That's, typically the route into homeownership is through a mortgage. So that makes sense. And you can see that for our racial distribution, our renter households are more diverse racially compared to our owner households. Are a larger percentage of them are white, 88.2%. And so this is important to keep in mind, just because when we're talking about these different markets, they do have racial impacts as far as what ends up happening in each of the markets has a disparate racial impact. And then when you take a look at the renter and owner incomes, you can see that the renter incomes tend to be lower, the 0 to 25, 25 to 50, 50 to 75 make up about 80% of all of the renter households are below that income. Whereas when you look at the owner incomes, you can see that there's kind of a more even distribution. So there are owners that are in these lower income bands, but you can definitely tell that with the renter household incomes, it skews more toward lower incomes. And this is showing roughly the same thing as the income graph, now just related to AMI. So thinking about that 60% as being your middle, then you can see that 0 to 30% is often referred to as extremely low income, 30 to 50 low income, or very low income, 50 to 80 low income, 80 to 100 moderate to median, and above 100% is considered like moderate to upwards, everybody left over. And so you can definitely see that with the owner households, the majority of them make above the median income. They're above that 100% median income. Okay, so we've taken a look at the current population, and now we're going to take a look at the current housing supply. And before we do that, I just want to note that when we think about the types of housing, we want to see the full spectrum of housing types represented in a community in order to produce that stability and that ability to both move to the right on the housing continuum, potentially moving into homeownership, building savings and equity, as well as if setbacks happen, we want to have all of the different levels of housing represented in case people experience those setbacks, that they have something stable to go to. And you can see here that we have the AMI percentages listed. That doesn't mean that only those groups are using that type of housing. But it does mean, of course, that, if you're under-resourced and you have a lower income, you're much more likely to need homelessness or supportive services. And if you're upper income, as we saw in the homeownership graphs, you are much more likely to be able to qualify for a mortgage and move into that opportunity. So when we look at the type of housing units here in the Southeast Development District, we can see that the most common type of structure is a 1-unit detached, which is just your single family home. That's 69% of the housing units. And then you can see that your one unit attached, like townhome condo type situation, as well as these smaller multifamily type units are really small pieces. And you see then a slight bump here for the mobile homes at almost 10% of the units being mobile homes in the district. So an important thing to make sure that we think about, though, when we talk about the current housing supply is all across the United States. This graph shows housing starts in the entire United States. We really have been having an undersupply of housing ever since the housing crisis and Great Recession. You can see from this graph that the housing starts just kind of fall off a cliff, and it has taken a really, really long time to build back up to the level that we were building housing before the recession. But of course, we still have a growing population in the United States. And so that means that the household formation and people moving into needing different kinds of housing is still happening as they move through the life cycle, but we have been underbuilding. And so we're in a situation now where we have a very persistent undersupply of housing. And this is not just a Tennessee problem. This is an entire United States problem, since this was a national housing crisis. So because we haven't necessarily been building a lot more recently, what we see right now is that the median age of our housing stock is pretty old. So this is the middle age of a housing unit in each of the counties. And this is for the rental housing. So you can see, especially when you look here, that Bledsoe County has a median housing age of 48 years old for rental housing. And you can see that on the newer end, Rhea and is it Meigs? Meigs. Yep. See, I needed to check that one too. Thanks. And Meigs, Rhea and Meigs have the newest median. What? Ray. See, y'all are schooling me, and that's good. Okay, I'm gonna try it. Sequatchie. Okay, Meigs. All right, Ray. Okay, if I do that again, you just call out, okay? So I'm definitely not trying to be disrespectful. I just read them a million times and never heard them aloud. Okay, but you can see here, right, that the newer housing is in Ray and Meigs County. And so one thing I would want to know from you is, if we have folks that are represented from there, if y'all could, in the focus group, could speak to any maybe more recent building that is happening, that's usually a flag that potentially more new construction has happened in the area, because it scoots up that median number. And then on the owner side, you can see that in general, owner housing is newer than the rental housing, at least as far as medians go. And Sequatchie and Bledsoe County and Meigs have the newest housing supply. Whereas you can see that Hamilton County has the oldest housing supply for median housing anyway, for owner housing. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about housing prices. And when we think about housing prices in the last 5 years, okay, this graph right here shows the gross median rent in 2022 for each county. And then the little triangles show the percent change over the 5 years from 2017 to 2022. So you can see that Hamilton and Bradley have the most expensive rents, and that Polk and Grundy have the least expensive. But you can see that every single county had an increase in rent over the last 5 years. And some was pretty significant, like Hamilton had a 35% increase. So that's about a third. And you can see that many others are in the 20%. So it's a significant increase from 5 years ago. Similarly, for the median home sale price, you can see that those Hamilton and Bradley also have the highest median sale price. And so that the increase in the median home sale value has gone up in every country or county by a lot. So some places are, Bledsoe is 83%. That's almost a double of the previous price. And yeah, that's the highest one is Bledsoe according to the data. But you can see everywhere else it's camping out, and at least I'm wrong, Grundy has 141.8. So that's about a time and a half increase in 5 years. I knew there was one in there, but I was like, this one higher than 8%. Okay. And again, this is something where I would love to hear from y'all in the focus groups. Like, does this seem accurate to you? What additional context you might provide? But this is what the ACS data is showing. Okay, so now that we've talked a little bit about who lives here in the housing supply and the housing costs, now we're going to talk a little about like what housing we need and how we know we need it. And so the first indicator that we're going to talk about in just a second is called cost burden. And this is related to the future housing supply, because cost burden tells us that we have families who cannot find somewhere that's affordable to live. So they cannot find the unit that would match their affordability. And as a result, a cost burden household is going to spend 30% or more of their incomes on housing. So this is rental households. And you can see that for the Southeast region, 40% or 2 out of 5 households spend more than 30% of their incomes on rent currently. And now Southeast as a whole is showing a very slight decrease in cost burden households. 4.5% or 4.8% as a percent change is not actually very much. But what this means is the percentage of cost burden households has shrunk just a little bit in the last 5 years. And this could be for a couple of reasons. It could be because wages have gone up. It could be because people moved and we're measuring different people now. It could be because more housing was built. There's a lot of different ways that could happen. And you kind of see the mixed picture that make up that slight drop here. So this is showing that the colors represent the places that are most cost burdened. So Hamilton has about 42% of its renters that are cost burdened. And Sequatchie has even more, 53%, whereas Ray has 25%. Still 1 out of 4, that's a lot, but it's less compared to a lot of the other places. And it seems that Ray is showing that there's a 50% decrease. And again, this could be a sampling error thing. Any place that has a low or a smaller number of people is much more subject to sampling error. So when you see these big drops, if this is a place that doesn't have a lot of people, sometimes that's not actually accurate, but this is what the data shows. Okay, and then severe cost burden is an even greater indicator of having a supply problem, because in this case, households are spending more than half of their incomes on housing or renter housing. And so you can see that about 19% or about 1 out of 5 renters is spending more than half of their income on rent currently. And similar to the previous graphics, you can see that there's like a very, very tiny drop in that percentage over the last 5 years, but this is probably related to some regional differences. So sort of similar to what you saw before. In this case, the places that have the highest percentages of severely cost burdened households are Bledsoe and Sequatchie counties. And that the places that have experienced the largest increases are in those counties as well. Whereas you can see some of the other counties have a slight drop in the percentage. There's still a concerning number as far as percentage of households that are experiencing that, but there maybe is a slight drop. All right, so now we're going to transition and talk a little bit. Well, actually, I want to flag something really quickly. So in the renter space, right, we were talking about how folks are spending a lot of their income on rental, on rent. And THDA is doing some work right now to help us figure out why that's happening. Is it because there aren't enough units, like the units don't exist? Or is it because people are in housing that is a mismatched price from their income, right? So maybe you have a small amount of low income housing available, but you know, anybody can, unless it's restricted, anybody could live there. So some people, you know, live in cheaper housing to maximize their budgets, but then maybe there's not enough leftover housing for the folks who are in those lower incomes. So we're going to try to tease out for y'all on a regional basis what's happening. We didn't quite have those estimates ready, so we will let you know when those are released if you want to see kind of what we're finding as far as like actual analysis of shortages and mismatches. But then in the home ownership space, we use a different indicator of need to show that we need supply. So the homeowner opportunity index shows it tracks the percentage of homes that were sold in the previous calendar year that would be affordable to a household with the area median income. So in this case, roughly $60,000. And what you can see is for Southeast, about 41% of the homes that were sold in 2022 would have been affordable to the median income buyer. It doesn't mean it was sold to them. Doesn't even mean that a lot of homes were sold necessarily, but of the ones that were, 41%-ish were affordable. But this is a really big change from what was true 5 years ago. For every single county, the percentage of homes that were affordable to that median buyer have dropped significantly. So you can see right now, Hamilton, for example, 35% of homes are affordable to the median buyer. 5 years ago, that was 32 points higher. So in like the mid 60% of homes would have been affordable to that median buyer. And you can see that same kind of thing happening across all of the other counties as well. There's been a significant drop in affordability for that middle income buyer, which, you know, is crowding out the opportunity to make that transition from usually from renting into homeownership. Okay, so the cost burden and the homeownership opportunity index tell us that we need more affordable housing opportunities. And what will happen if that housing isn't built? Well, now we're going to just take a look at what we're seeing related to housing instability in the region and who's experiencing it. So the housing stability and homelessness services are provided at the continuum of care level, which is different than the development district level. So you can see here that for Southeast Tennessee, it's mostly covered by the Chattanooga, Southeast Tennessee continuum of care. And then you can see that a teeny little bit is covered by Central Tennessee. So we're going to look at the Chattanooga, Southeast Tennessee data first. And this is a graph showing the last 6 years of the point in time count, which is conducted every January. And this is just a count of the number of people experiencing homelessness, either who are in like a formal sheltered environment or that teams encounter in cars or out on the streets. And what you can see here is that we had a really high peak in our count for this region in 2022, with then a pretty sharp drop. And the thing to notice here is that the point in time count is always going to be an undercount. Every time, you're never going to find all of the people who are experiencing homelessness. And obviously, that this is mostly going to be folks who are in a shelter environment, are on the street, or are in a car. This isn't going to show you who's doubled up, staying with a friend, those kinds of housing instability circumstances. But I would love to hear in the focus groups or the Q&A, like some context around this, because the big swoosh up followed by a dip, does that match what people are seeing on the ground? I'm curious about that. Huh? Great, let's do it. So, okay, so the reason that 2022 is so much higher is because you weren't counting as thoroughly the rural homelessness. Okay, and was it implemented also in 2023? Okay. Does it match folks' understanding that there would be a drop from 2022 to 2023? Totally fine if not. When I saw this, I was like, wow, that's a big drop. You can see that the pieces that are dashed out, those are the years during the pandemic where the guidelines as far as how the count needed to happen were loosened. And so the data is just considered to be less reliable. We don't totally know if it's, accurate. So that's why it's dashed. You can see here too that we have a couple of the more vulnerable populations tracked. So even though children is a small percentage of the people that are counted, we keep careful track of those since it's obviously a pretty unstable situation. And then our Black population is also tracked here because, as you'll see in a second, Black people are overrepresented in the point in time count compared to like the overall COC population. So this is showing the age distribution. This one is showing the total distribution for the entire continuum of care. So you can see 23% children, whereas when it was counted in 2023, it was 3.8% children. And you can see that seniors are underrepresented as well. So it's more this like middle income group that is showing up in the point in time count more disproportionately. And then you can see on the left, this is the racial distribution for the entire continuum of care. And then you can see what the racial distribution is for the point in time count. And so you can see that the COC's Black population is disproportionately represented in the point in time count data. I'm wondering, I maybe didn't include the other COC now that I'm looking at this. I apologize for the folks who are from the one county that's pushed over into the other group. So this graph is showing the census tract version of the rental cost burden, severe cost burden. So the dark color here is where 30% or more of households are paying more than half of their income in rent. And the reason I'm highlighting this is because this is probably where quite a few of the folks who are experiencing that housing instability is coming from. Because of course, any individual, if you talk to them about why they're experiencing homelessness, it can be very complex. And the thing that tends to be in common amongst all of those people are just that they don't have a lot of resources. So if they're paying a lot in rent, that makes them disproportionately vulnerable into slipping into this housing instability. And the Southeast area actually has a couple areas of both high rental cost burden as well as concentrated area of poverty, which means that 40% or more of the households have incomes below the federal poverty threshold. And so those are outlined in red, which I know is kind of hard to see here, but there's a few that are down in the lower corner of Hamilton County. There's one in McMinn County. And so you can see that those are potentially areas that are especially vulnerable because they have both high cost burden and low income. And then it's also important to note that then when you look at the racial demographics in just those regions that have that high cost burden and low income, that between 53 and 90%, depending on the census tract, of the heads of the household or heads of household are part of a minority racial group. And so this is something that we look at and also HUD looks at as a racially and ethnically concentrated area of poverty. And we look at this partially because of that disproportionality related to what we see in the homelessness counts. Okay, so that's what I have for you today. I want to open it up for questions and comments to the room. This is not the same as the focus group time, so I'm thinking we'll do maybe 15, 20 minutes at most of the comments, and then I'd love to split our room and Ben and I will get to hear from y'all about your communities, but I want to give a chance for folks to respond to the data again, looking at, what stood out to you. What questions do you have? Is there anything that maybe seemed off or missing? And so I'll just open it up to the room.
The main question from my perspective is Hispanic population seems to be underrepresented just
Okay.
broadly based on just lived experience. And then second, the prosperity data where it showed rental households across our region, specifically Raleigh, where prosperity increased.
Yeah.
That makes absolutely no sense. And it's almost like, are we counting stimulus checks or is like, there's no possible way that with the rise in cost of housing, that incomes have gone up. So like, what's the data point that's like not being factored into make that correlation? I'm not sure what it is.
But your data did show that those that were lower income had an increase in cost of living.
Yeah, well, so the lower income households are disproportionately cost burdened, of course, just because they have less money. So, high rents are going to cause them to be more cost burdened more easily. I agree with you. I don't know that that's accurate. Like, that's what the data says, but I agree. Like, when we look at the rent slide, right, and you see the 25% increase as a median in the rent, it is hard to fathom that wages have necessarily gone up that much, right? So I don't know that it is accurate, and I think it's important to flag that as, like, how many people would raise their hand and say they also don't think that for their region cost burden went down?
So I don't know how much income gap and wealth gap is factored into that. Like, if you're looking at total incomes, there's a big wide, like even in our county, I think there's a wide gap of income. So like, if you're looking at total income, that might skew those numbers potentially, but I do feel like there needs to be it needs to be broken down.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't make sense on the ground that, and also the median income, which that was probably accurate for 2022, but it's definitely not accurate.
Well, I just thought of something.
Median rent.
Something that could be happening, two things that could be happening. That, yeah.
think it might be more than what the
Yeah.
income and wage gap and the equity in wages is what's the.
That could,
factor there.
yeah, that could be the case. So like you could have a couple things happening maybe. You could maybe have, you could maybe have folks moving into an area within 5 years, right? Where the incomes are now higher on paper, but you're not really measuring the same group. That could happen. Another thing that could happen is people could move out. So like you could have the rents get too high and it pushes people to leave, in which case you're not measuring the same group. So this is why I can't always, I can't tell you for sure what's happening, but it's good to know that what you see or like what your impression is, at least for the folks who are still living there, you're like the rent has gone up more than the wages. That's an important insight. There's a lot of different reasons why it can look a certain way. So thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, and bought these super expensive homes, and then don't live there anymore. They Airbnb them, so even the renters in these homes aren't, they're not part of the state property.
Yeah, there aren't a lot of really good ways to track that. Unfortunately, like migration patterns, like we don't tag households from one place to another. And then HUD is under mandate to protect people's privacy. So while they probably do track it, they can't release it with that kind of granularity because you might be able to figure out who people are. They can only like provide certain cuts for that of the data for that reason. We know that to some degree that is happening though, that you know, places where housing prices are extremely high, but people can work remotely, that there was a big reshuffling and where people bought houses and chose to live. So I can't really provide any great data, but I agree that anecdotally that definitely has happened. We do a little bit of tracking of investor buy-ups at THDA. Our senior economist has worked on that. But that wouldn't show for like somebody who bought a single property and then decided not to live there and Airbnbs it out. Our methodology is they have to have bought multiple properties so that we can flag them as an investment buyer. So yeah, yes, Ben.
So it's not from HUD, but the IRS tracks something called adjusted gross income, AGI. And so if you want to chat after, I can like point you in the right direction. But basically what they do is they track people's tax returns. And so if you filed 1 year in California, but the next year you filed in Tennessee, that they count that as migration from one state to the other. So there's, I learned this at my last job. So it shows the income, the income moving out of the state, but it also shows the number of people. It'd be nice if it was a little more granular than just the state, but yeah, the IRS publishes those.
Other questions or comments? These are great, y'all.
Do you see a trend in all of, I know some economists have said nationwide that younger people, it will get to where they don't want to own something necessarily. Do we see a change where people aren't wanting ownership, wanting to stay in a place where they rent because they have amenities?
Yeah.
They have, maintenance that they don't have to do if they own a home. They also want to do that. Minimizing some of their responsibility of home ownership. Is that a trend you all see at all or track that?
So I'm not aware of any data that gets at the intention for why people aren't transitioning into homeownership. But it is true that the median age at which people buy a house is bumping up. So that does mean that for sure, there's a combination of lack of opportunity or perhaps lack of interest or perhaps both. We don't have anything about like what the reason is aside. The most obvious reason is just that it takes a long time to build up, down payment or income that can support a mortgage. And so the more expensive it gets, the longer it takes and the less possible it becomes for groups of people. That's kind of why we look at that homeowner opportunity index, is we definitely know that the opportunity has decreased. And so younger folks who make less money or potentially are not in dual income households are getting priced out regardless of what they want. So ACS is always going to have a lag. We track the sale price data of both new homes, like new developments, separate from existing stock. The homeowner opportunity index that I showed is averaging both of those together, like the percentage of both together, but we do disaggregate them. I cannot remember whether like the new housing that's being built is more expensive than the existing housing. I think for some regions it definitely is, but I don't know if that's a general trend. We do have that data though. The state does look at the price point of the new housing that's being built, and we do look at the homeowner opportunity index for that housing. I just don't remember what the trend is. Ben, did we have any questions from online? Okay. Okay. Any other questions kind of related to the data piece here? Great. Well, just to close out the presentation before we do the focus groups. So like I said, we will publish these slides on our website, and since you all RSVP'd, I'll shoot everybody an email when that happens so that if you want to reference them, that'll probably be sometime within like the next month. And then I also will let you know when we publish those results related to rental supply and kind of that question of, does the housing exist or is this mostly a mismatch problem? We've been doing some work on that, so I'll let y'all know when that's there, because that can help you understand for your region more about like what kinds of units might need to be built. Obviously, we can't control where people live, so like the mismatch problem, it's kind of just good to know if that's what's happening, And then lastly, this process, our meeting today, plus our focus groups are going to, be put into the consolidated plan, and that will be published next year. So a ways away. And then we also did a housing needs survey, and we will share the results of that with your development district so that they can share it with you all or do some regional planning. But the results of that survey will also go into the housing needs analysis that I'm preparing. So thank you so much. Let's go ahead and transition to the focus groups.